Will democracy survive in the next couple of years?
And essentially, we are the same.
And there are so many needs that Minnesota has.
What people are saying they need right now.
Access to democracy is made possible by donations from the following organizations. Thomson Reuters, a global company with expertise and insight to unravel complex situations in the areas of law, tax, compliance, government, and media. Their worldwide network of journalists and editors keep customers up to speed on relevant global events. Thomson Reuters, the Answer Company. Crutchfield Dermatology, a full-service treatment center in Medi-Spa in Eagan. Their goal is to help you look good and feel great with beautiful skin. With service built around courtesy, dignity, and respect, Mayo-trained Dr. Charles Crutchfield personally treats each patient and is acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. Firefly Credit Union, with locations throughout the Twin Cities, has proudly served Minnesotans since 1925. Firefly guides its members forward by delivering customized financial solutions to improve their lives in all aspects of banking. Firefly Credit Union, they light the way with life illuminated. Edina Eye, Physicians and Surgeons, a division of Twin Cities Eye Consultants, has proudly served the Twin Cities for more than 55 years. Now in 7 convenient locations. Using the most advanced technology combined with human touch, Edina Eye offers comprehensive services but dedicated specialists committed to excellence with innovative procedures and expertise for the most advanced eye care.
Welcome to this edition of Access to Democracy. My name is Paul Anderson, former Supreme Court Justice Paul Anderson, retired. And today we have a very special guest with us, Judge Kevin Burke. We'll get into this right away. You are the last sitting judge in the state of Minnesota who was appointed by Rudy Perpich. Is that right?
That's right. I was appointed in 1984.
1984. And you're retiring now.
I was too young. The critics that I had said that Governor Perpich appointed me and I was too young. I was 33 at the time and too liberal. Now it's just too liberal because in September I turned 70 and hit mandatory retirement. So I suppose there's some poetic justice that I was too young to become a judge and now too old to become a judge, to be a judge.
You know what Perpich said when he was criticized for appointing judges who were young? He said, "Oh, don't worry about that. They'll grow out of it." And I would say that you have grown out of it and really had a very, very distinguished career as a judge. I mean, very distinguished. But before I get into your career, some people still remember Rudy Perpich, our governor. I have told you that, he's kind of eclectic, and I was very part of the campaign to, get Arnie Carlson to replace him. But I make no bones about saying is that he will be remembered as one of our better governors. Can you tell me whether I'm correct or not in that analysis?
Well, I obviously have a bias, but I think the bias is true in this case. That is, the assessment is true. Governor Perpich believed in doing things. He was able to make government deliver for the people. And it wasn't really always driven by his own personal pet peeve. So Governor Jesse Ventura wanted to get rid of license plate tab fees or something. Perpich really never cared about anything on a personal level. He built stadiums. He built the Mall of America. He revitalized much of greater Minnesota. He got things done. He had incredible energy. I mean, it was not an unusual thing to learn that you had a meeting with the governor at the governor's mansion starting at 1 a.m. So the guy just had incredible amounts of energy. He believed in getting things done. He was practical, but it was, if he thought we ought to get this done, it was pretty hard to convince him it was something that was not achievable. He was a very remarkable person.
I think, and address this, he understood that when you're governor of all the people, and people are looking for you to have some vision, some agenda to make the state better.
I think that's true. We live in an era that is extremely politically polarized now. And Rudy was a partisan. I don't think you could grow up on the range when he did and not be partisan. But I think once he became governor, he really did try to end up governing the state as a whole. So if you look at that time, southern Minnesota was highly Republican. Rudy cared about making sure that the farmers of southern Minnesota got the things that they needed to survive and grow, just like he did for the Iron Range.
So I first encountered you when I went into the courtroom of my former partner, Paul Magnuson, federal district court judge. We used to have lunch every 3-4 months. And when I showed up that day, he said to me, Paul, stay a little bit after lunch. I want you to watch this attorney. He's one of the best that has ever come into my courtroom. And that was you. But there's a story that's told with respect to how you were innovative in representing a well-known public figure in Minnesota, DJ Leary, a very prominent DFL operative. But you used a tactic in that trial that allowed the truth to emerge. Can you just elaborate on that a little bit?
The case was a tax evasion case in which the argument made by the government was that he had severely underreported his income. He had an accountant who's passed away by now. The accountant did his taxes for many, many years. And there was a problem with the tax returns that every even year when there was an election, there was a different signature. It was clearly not DJ who was doing it. DJ explained to me that his accountants essentially forged his name because in election years he was so busy doing the political work that was his living, he didn't have time to get it signed. They were joint returns, and so I thought I should talk to his ex-wife, and he did not want me to do that.
Well, she did. She was pretty bitter, was she not?
Oh, she definitely. And I went and talked to her, and she did not like DJ at all. I mean, I have no idea if she's still alive, but she definitely did not like him, didn't trust him. I remember one of the things she said to me was, he's a complete liar. You shouldn't believe anything that he says. Now, the law allows you to call character witnesses on a relevant trait, and the relevant trait would be truthfulness or dishonesty. So you kind of wonder, how do you call somebody who's going to get up and say that your client is a pathological liar and say that's good character testimony, and this is what I believe? She told me that despite all of that, DJ would never lie to the IRS because he was afraid that Nixon or the Nixon kind of people would use the IRS to go after him because he was a Democrat. And I thought if I can get that in front of the jury, that's pretty powerful stuff, that he was not going to lie to the IRS. He'd lie to everybody else, but not them. And so I did call her. She was a very successful witness. I called Jim Ramstad, the former congressman, and I called a few other Republicans who testified. And in the end, I think that character witness testimony can be oversold. I don't think he was acquitted because of that, but it certainly helped.
Oh, I'm a little more confident that when you have an ex-wife who hates him and tells him he'd lie about anything but the IRS, that probably was a big thing that led to that victory. But how did it come that you were appointed a judge at the young age of 33?
Well, I did not aspire to be a judge. As you know, my wife, Susan, was Judge Magnuson's clerk. She always wanted to be a judge. I didn't want to become a judge. It wasn't that I was opposed to it. It was just not something that I was really burning to do. But because I knew Governor Perpich, I was thinking, I know enough people who have gone through life and said they applied to be a judge and that they just never were able to do it. And I had some belief, or some reason to believe, that if I wanted to be a judge, Governor Perpich would appoint me. And I thought at the time that if I was a judge at 33, I'll do something else. I'll be a retired judge at 40 and I'll do something else. So I did. I applied. The governor did appoint me, and I enjoyed it. I never looked back and said, hey, I should have done something else. I've had a very successful career, very rewarding, and it's a very cool job.
Now, but 33, was there any criticism that you were too young to be appointed a judge?
There was. I hit 70 in September, and so as I said off air, I was too young to become a judge, and now there's too poetic justice that I'm going to be too old to be a judge.
You know what?
I had a lot more experience, though, than many people coming on the bench, as I represented 18 people accused of murder. I tried first-degree murder cases. I represented a person who at the time was the largest mass murder that Hennepin County had ever seen. So I was in the courtroom enough that, compared to people who get appointed today, I had a lot more jury trial experience than many of them did. So, but I think in the end, because you were the chair of the Judicial Selection Committee, you can oversell the idea about experience, because the role of a judge is different than being a trial lawyer. To put it in the sports analogy is, just because you can pitch doesn't mean you can catch. There are people who have a lot of experience in the courtroom who are too dominating. I mean, this is how I would try the case, and you can't be that way. So I think that governors who make appointments need to look at the values that the person has as being the paramount criteria for who I appoint.
I agree with you 100%, and I came to that opinion by experience. You know what Perpich said about his appointment of young judges? He said to people, don't worry about that. They'll grow out of that.
Yeah, that's true.
And of course you said that. But you have had so much experience on the bench. What are some of the changes that you've witnessed in judging and the law? And I do want you to talk maybe a little bit about policing. So what are the changes you've observed over your tenure?
I set the first drug court up in Minnesota. And when I did so, it was controversial. I didn't see it controversial, but I had critics. Now you see a lot more therapeutic courts around the state, which I think is good. I don't think, however, that we've reached a panacea on that. I think that we have the capacity, indeed the responsibility, to expand what we do in therapeutic courts. We've unified the courts. When I first went on the bench, there was a county court, a municipal court, and a district court. I think that era, there's no one left on the bench except me, I think. Maybe one or two others, whoever were on the bench when there was a county and a municipal court bench. I think that's been good.
It has been good, has it?
There is state funding, which I think has generally been very good, because what it has done is to end up saying what the poorer parts of the state will get served. When you fund courts off the local property tax, and they don't have a good property tax base, they don't get the kind of service that you really need. I remember when I was involved in that effort, there was a shooting of a deputy in southern Minnesota, and 3 or 4 people were killed. It was horrible, but it was a little bitty county. And now we got to get lawyers for all these defendants. Literally, the county is facing the prospect that we're going to have to close the library and sell the place so we can afford the defense. So I think that the state funding has been generally good. There's problems in it, but it's generally the right thing to have.
I maybe want to editorialize a bit. I mean, so much of the economic engine of the state comes out of the metro area.
Yeah.
And so what you're talking about is the metro area, and its funding does help out state considerably.
Sure. Yeah, that does. And I don't think that's bad. I think that if you're going to end up having Minnesota grow as a state, survive as a state, compete with other states, it has to be a unified state. We benefit from the farm economy. We benefit from all other parts of the state, but that means we all have to kind of row generally in the same direction.
Now, okay, I want to talk about policing. And we're going to talk about actually 2 parts here. I mean, you've seen the change in the nature of people who come into the court, those charged with crimes, and you've seen the nature, the change of policing. I mean, and it's a big issue now. Can you share with us some insights into that issue?
There is a lot of reason to be legitimately concerned about the police reaction and relationship with the minority community. And certainly it's heightened right now. But I think that all of us in the justice system contribute to the mess that we are presently in. So you can't let off the judges, the prosecutors, the defense bar, and say this is a police problem. I believe we allow the police to make stops of people of color too indiscriminately. We've seen nationally stop and frisk, which was in New York, and everyone, that whole era of stop and frisk in New York was enabled by the judges who allowed the police to do that. So I think that we've got to accept the judges are just as responsible for the mess we're in as the police are. Secondly, I think we've made mistakes in, we had good intentions, racial bias task force, Batson challenges, things you were involved in both at the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court. But we haven't made the kind of ultimate progress we want to make. And I think some part of that is this. We too often deal with the issue of race by appointing a committee. And I think it's the responsibility of the positional leaders to lead and consistently deal with this as a core problem facing the Minnesota court system. And that means the Chief Justice, whoever he or she may be. It means the Chief of the Court of Appeals, whoever they may be. And it means all of the judges dealing with the same thing. So we've got to make changes, but I don't think it's just a matter of saying, well, if we could kick up Bob Kroll out of the Minneapolis Police Union leadership, that'd change the whole problem. It's much more systemic than that.
Now, as a former justice and seeing what's happening now, I've done a lot of thinking and introspection. And I even wrote saying that I didn't speak out enough and loud enough with respect to the problems I saw. I wrote an article talking about those problems. And I'm really feeling that, people like myself, I mean, I did a lot. You know where my
no question.
But I don't think I did enough. So what more should we do?
Well, some part of it, I think, is that you have to be honest and be willing to take heat. So I've seen over the years where a judge will say, I think the police officer stopped him because he's black. And there's a lot of data that indicate that that's true. I said, well, then you put that in your order. No, I don't know. And so the fear about just calling it and saying, look, seems to me that the basis here is driven by a pretext. Body cameras have helped a lot. I remember the first time I really confronted the body camera issue was, it was a highway patrol officer, and he's saying there's weaving there, and that's why I stopped him. And I'm looking at this video and saying, I don't see any weaving there. And then you don't want to end up discouraging the police from having squad or body cameras. So I ended up deciding, well, what's the standard of review if you look at the video? And I decided to apply the NFL rule, which I did in the written order, which was, does the video show irrefutable evidence that they blew the call? And my thing was, yes, there's irrefutable evidence in this video. There was no weaving, and I'm tossing the case.
But here's a problem that judges often face. I mean, I agree with you. Judges have to be part of the solution. But the system is set up, you've seen it, the way police reports are written, and the way the issue comes to you, that it kind of puts brackets on it that really does limit your ability to maybe get at what you see as the core issue.
I don't know that I would necessarily agree that I'm limited. I think that's a little bit cop-out-ish, if that's a word for me.
It's a double entendre.
It's difficult to determine credibility. So I have written articles about the difficulty judges have in determining who's telling the truth. There's a really interesting study in which they surveyed quite a few judges who had an average of 11.5 years experience as trial judges, and they were no better than flipping a coin in actually determining who's telling the truth. So I think that we need to do more judicial training on the limitations that you have as a human being. If you start off with the idea of, I'm not very good at determining who's telling the truth, the burden of proof is much more important. If you get into this mindset that, I can tell that Paul's lying, then I don't even begin to think about who has the burden of proof and how serious is that and all those other things. So we need to do more training about judges in decision making.
This is an excellent segue to the next part of what I want to talk to you about. You have achieved a national and international reputation for the approach that you do to educating people on how to be good judges and how the system works. I mean, you lecture all over the country and you've lectured internationally. Can you elaborate a little bit on this aspect of your life?
I got interested in the idea of fairness first in the early 90s. I read an article that was written by a guy by the name of Tom Tyler, who now teaches at Yale. And it was along the lines of, why do people obey judges' orders? And I thought it was kind of interesting. It was, Tom's a friend of mine now, but it was a little dense. But the bottom line was, I learned there are all these social scientists who study these things, and none of us in the judiciary knew about them. So when I became chief judge the second time in Hennepin County, I really pushed the idea of we're going to look seriously at implementing procedural fairness in the courts. And what the literature shows is people understand that our courts are run by human beings. They want to win, but they're willing to accept loss more than you might think if certain other things are met. They want to be heard, they want to be treated with respect, and they want to understand why the decision was made. So I spend a lot of time kind of preaching that. I believe that Minnesota should adopt a litigant's Bill of Rights. 100% of the time, you will be listened to, treated with respect, and you will understand our decision. And we ought to measure that regularly, and you ought to be able to go to the Minnesota Judicial Branch's website and see how we're performing.
But Judge, what you're saying is so common sense. Well, do you have to teach this to judges? Do they have
Yeah,
to?
because at least when I first started this, it was really about, I got the rule of law correct. And the only thing that I have to do is to get the rule of law correct. Now you have a new phenomena, which is on the bench is this big screen computer. And so the judge is looking at the computer instead of looking at the litigant. There are a bunch of people up there passing papers back and forth. The National Center for State Courts did a study that indicates 40% of the people believe that our orders are not understandable. And we have very few courts that regularly ask people, when you leave court, do you understand what the judge did and why? If you look at when you go to a pharmacist, they won't let you out of Walgreens with your drugs unless you can kind of go over how you use the drugs. So I think that it is common sense, but we're an institution that sometimes is not rooted in common sense.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the things I admire to you, I mean, you do focus on doing justice, but you always try to think about how to do the right thing and explain that right thing to the people in your courtroom.
Right.
So you've done a lot of international work. I mean, I think we've been in Albania, been in India. What led to that?
I got invited, and there's a certain allure. You've done stuff too, is somebody says, hey, you want to go to Albania? Sure. You want to go to Kosovo? Sure. You want to go to India? Sure. You want to go to Mexico? Sure. You want to go to Ireland? Absolutely. So I've been to many places. I think that there are a couple of things that come away from that. One is you learn a lot about yourself, that is your own system, by kind of looking back and comparing things. Because you are dealing with another country, you got to end up being able to explain what we do, which requires you then to reflect whether or not you could do it better. I think we've got a wonderful system in the United States, but it can get better, and those experiences are great. I wish that more Minnesota judges would do it.
Yeah, my experience is just like yours. I learned so much about myself and the system by doing this. But there's one little incident. I mean, literally in India, you had roofs falling in.
That's true.
You. Is that right?
India had a 10-year backlog of criminal cases, and they asked me to come and spend some time with them on how to deal with the backlog. And I went out to dinner one night, and it was a nice restaurant. It was not a dive. And the next thing I know is I've got this beam on my shoulder. If it hit my head, I wouldn't be here.
So, I mean, it's a little bit hazardous. You know, Judge, if you had 30 minutes or 30 seconds to say, what's your best legacy, what would you say?
I cared about the people that appeared before me.
Okay. I have another question for you. Is your daughter as good a golfer as you say she is?
I have a 15-year-old daughter who is going to be much better than I am, and I shot 75 yesterday at Hazeltine.
She's kind of the apple of your eye, isn't it?
That's true. Yeah.
And isn't it interesting that she's a daughter, but she's going to carry forward your legacy on golf?
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
It's really cool. Well, Judge, it has been such a pleasure having you on the show. There's so much more I'd like to talk to. I might like to ask you back. I would like to have you delve into issues like the Supreme Court, how those decisions affect what you do. So if I can get the producer of the show to agree with me, would you come back?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to come. Thank you for having me today.
Oh, it was a pleasure. I mean, it was a challenge because there's so much that we have to cover. But again, thank you so much, Your Honor, and congratulations on a wonderful career.
Thank you.